Hey, thanks for tuning into the podcast. I'm here tonight with Mike Thursby. Mike is a professor at Minnesota State University, Mankato. He teaches the athletic bands and teaches percussion. And what else am I missing?
Teach doing a lot of music education the last couple of years too. So kind of a little bit of everything.
Awesome, man. I obviously know you through school and you've been a clinician before and worked with my groups and stuff like that. But the reason I wanted to get you on here tonight is just to talk drums and kind of nerd out about that a little bit because we're both, well, I'm kind of a wannabe drummer. Saxophone was my primary instrument, but I've always loved playing drum kit and I got started at that in about sixth grade. So why did you start playing drums?
So there's two reasons, and it's kind of a two-part story. The first, I was in sixth grade, going into sixth grade, and I wanted to join band. And my dad was a trumpet player, and I thought I had two older sisters, and I'm like, okay, trumpet, I think is going to be the instrument that I'd like to choose, just because that's what my dad did. And I didn't have the embouchure. I couldn't, my mouth couldn't make a sound on the mouthpiece. Um, so I was looking at all the other instruments and I tried them all. I tried the flute and they said, "Hey, you could be a really good flute player." And I was a young man going into sixth grade, and that unfortunately at the time wasn't the cool thing to do. Both of my sisters, one played the clarinet, one played the alto saxophone. So I was kind of looking to stay away from the woodwinds too, because they're both older than me and I wanted to do something different. I had taken piano lessons for 5 or 6 years, 7 years, something like that, prior to going into band. And the band director at the time suggested percussion because I had that piano background. But it wasn't like ever a thing where I was super inspired to be a drummer at that point. Like I just didn't think that was the thing. It wasn't really until I got into going into high school that I got inspired to be a drummer. And it's because I saw the high school drummers and I was really inspired by them. There was a drum set player who lived just down the street from me. He played drum set in the jazz band and kind of taught me my first like rock beat on the drum set and that kind of thing. And that kind of got me inspired. So seeing those high school kids is really where I was like, yeah, I want to be a drummer and being getting into it from that point. That's where I think I knew that I wanted to be a drummer for sure.
Yeah, we have similar kind of family upbringings in terms of music too. So I'm the youngest of four, and I have three older sisters. There's another band director in the family, and another one of my sisters is a teacher, but also plays a lot of flute still. And so there's a flute player and a clarinet player. And when
Mm.
I was picking out instruments, I just kind of went with the saxophone because we had one at home and I could kind of halfways make a sound on it, so I went with that. But
Sure.
I think I always like was kind of a percussionist because I remember setting up like things on the couch, like different like pencil boxes and stuff, and just playing beats on them and stuff. And I also took piano lessons from third grade to ninth grade, and then when I was a ninth grader, I decided I was too cool to stay with piano, which was really stupid because I use piano almost every single day.
Hmm.
In my job. But anyway, by that time, I had already been playing drum kit and guitar, so I guess I kind of justified it with that. But yeah, I got a drum kit when I was a sixth grader. I remember my parents talking about when Bill Clinton was in office, he must have found some money for tax rebate or something. So they were able to purchase me a drum kit thanks to the Clinton tax checks in '96 or '97 or whatever. And I started playing in middle school jazz band, and then I was the guy in high school if we played something in spring that required drum kit, like a show tune or whatever, and it just kind of went from there. We had a jazz band in high school. We also had a polka band, which was pretty
Oh,
cool,
wow.
and yeah, for sure. We even played on what was it called? Bandwagon. We recorded in studio and there were people there dancing and everything. And I was the kit drummer for that, which
Hmm.
you either played a boom chick, or a waltz. It was pretty basic stuff, but
Yeah.
definitely pretty cool. So, what are some of your favorite drummers now and who's influenced you along the way?
Yeah, that's a really tough question because I think my musical tastes span so wide. It's like I love listening to drummers like Dave Garibaldi from a funk style. I love listening. Carter Beauford, the drummer
Hmm.
for the Dave Matthews Band, is a huge
Yeah.
influence in me. But
Yeah.
he's a really different style of drummer. He's a left-handed drummer, and the way that he plays his grooves and he does his fills is very different than a right-handed drummer would. But just his pocket and his groove, the way that he plays, he's huge. I really like Mike Portnoy, the way that Mike Portnoy, who is now returned as the drummer for Dream Theater, he plays, it's almost like an orchestration versus playing drums. So like the way that I hear him as a drummer is more of an orchestral percussionist than he is like just a straight ahead drummer. So Mike Portnoy, Dave Grohl is a huge hero of mine, and the late Taylor Hawkins, just the Foo Fighters and what Dave Grohl did with Nirvana. It's huge, and I get to finally see the Foo Fighters perform this summer live in the Twin Cities, and I'm so stoked for it. But
Awesome.
unfortunately, it's not with Taylor Hawkins. That I had tickets to go see them when they were going to be here, and then he passed away
Hey, but
right before I was gonna.
Josh Freese is probably the next best thing. He's a
I know,
monster studio drummer. So yeah,
I
unfortunately
know.
Hawkins won't be there, but Freese is going to be the next best thing.
Yeah, it's them. I love listening to bands like 311 and Incubus and the Deftones. Those were kind of like those formative years for me when I was going through the stuff in middle school and high school, and those were bands that I listened to a lot. So, Chad Sexton, drummer from 311, he has a really fascinating story because he's actually a marching percussionist, kind of like I am, who plays drum set, and you can really hear that in his sound too. But that's the tip of the iceberg, man. That's like, yeah, there you could name a style, and I could tell you two or three other drummers that I like that are totally different.
Yeah.
That's a tough question to answer, I think, for me. What about
Yeah.
you?
Well, Deftones are, they're one of my favorite bands, and I think we're around the same age. I graduated high school in 2005. You might be a little bit older, but
It was
yeah, so
2003.
okay, yeah. So Abe Cunningham is just not an overly flashy drummer, but I like his groove and
Hmm.
just yeah, so he rocks. One of my favorite bands right now is Periphery, and I don't know if you're into them at all, but it's pretty
Mm-mm.
heavy stuff, but their drummer Matt Halpern is just an absolute monster, and he's a really strong mental health advocate,
Oh,
and he
cool.
had a lot of interesting stuff that he was posting during COVID about his own anxiety and stuff like that. So I can relate to that, and I thought that that was a really cool, just this absolute monster metal drummer, being vulnerable in that way. Um, you mentioned Carter Beauford too. Like, I have a question to ask you later about drum fills and stuff like that. So I've
Hmm.
Carter Beauford is on my list, and then the guy from Yellow Card, the former
Hmm.
drummer. I don't know how you pronounce his name. I think it's Longinu Parsons the third, but I like a lot of his drum parts. I think he left the band in about 2008 or so. I don't know who the guy is now, but um, yeah, those three, I guess, would be the big ones. And then Lars Ulrich takes
Yeah.
a ton of crap online, and he doesn't deserve it, but he was definitely a big influence. Like I remember having the Black Album and Load and Reload,
Hmm.
and you could say what you want, but they're one of the biggest bands in the world, and he was a big part
Yeah.
of that. So he does take a lot of crap, but I don't think he deserves it.
Yeah, I listened to the symphonic album that they did a ton.
Yeah.
Where they played live with an orchestra. I think it was called S&M. That
San
album,
Francisco
I
Symphony, yeah.
yeah, I would drum along with that thing all the time. Bless my parents because, and my sisters who were in the house because they lived with me just throwing down all of the weight of every day. I would go into my room, I would put my music on, and I would just play. And I
Yep.
can't imagine what was like for them on the other end of it, but it was really therapeutic for me. And you talk about mental health, and that was in high school. That was my mental health for sure. It was just going into my room and playing drums and
Yep.
at the time, whatever it was, whatever the music was that I was listening to, that was where I could just kind of get away from it and I could just be in my own space.
Same thing here, 100%. That all the teen angst and everything I was feeling just went into the drums, and I hit real hard. I remember when I went to college, we had like the percussion methods course, of course, and then I took some drum lessons or whatever and played in the percussion ensemble or whatever, and maybe you know this person, Gene Kaczynski, was my professor, and one of the first things he said when I was in percussion ensemble, he's like, "I got you got like you're playing way too loud," and like that's all I knew because it was just all this like all this frustration coming out. But I learned to rein it in and be a little bit more of a tasteful player, at least I think. So yeah, I can certainly relate. The rule in my
Mhm.
household was drums and guitar were fine, but once 9 o'clock hit, then it had to be quiet. And
Sure,
so
sure.
parents were very supportive, so that was really cool. Let's talk gear. Let's nerd out a little bit on gear. So, I guess I'll tell you about my first drum kit, which I actually recently got rid of. So that, whoop, like cat's gonna make an appearance here. Um, First kit, Ludwig Accent, got it from Joe Meidel, Music Mart. And I played that kit up until about 2 years ago, and I upgraded the cymbals and all the hardware and stuff like that. And I was really proud of owning that kit for that entire time. And it just got to a point where it was so broken down, and I was like, it's kind of time for something else. So I actually stumbled upon a used Yamaha Stage Custom, which I really like. And I went through a phase of cymbal buying. Like I always kind of wanted to be a Peisty 2002 player. I remember getting the catalogs from like Sam Ash and Musician's Friend and seeing the red Peisty 2002, and I'm like, I want to play these one day. And then I finally like got to a point where I could afford them. And I couldn't jive with those cymbals. I really wanted to like
Hmm.
them, but I didn't. And I'm basically all Zildjian now. Again, thanks to Music Mart, they've been very patient with me with all my gear trades and all the questions I ask and stuff like that. But I'm finally at a point where I have a set of symbols that I really like, and I've kind of found my sound on the kit, I guess. I'm sure you
Hmm.
can relate a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because my first kit was also a Ludwig accent. It was like a $500 kit, and that drum set lasted me through college. I
Mm.
took that drum set on tour with me when I was a touring drum set player. It wasn't yeah, the shell pack and all of that wasn't the fanciest. I upgraded almost that's where I was like in high school, definitely a drum nerd, and I upgraded all of the hardware and I took those drums apart and I like was meticulous about it, made sure I had the best heads possible on it, and I was like super focused on the tuning. The drums weren't the nicest drums in the world, but I made sure that the heads were good. I think at the time I was using a lot of Remo heads, pinstripes, and that kind of thing. The heads and the tuning was I focused a lot on that with the drums. Now I have like two or three Mapex kits that I rotate through. One that's more of a rock kit that's just like a bigger size bass drum, and one that's more of a cocktail kind of smaller kit. They're all on campus, so I get to kind of pick and choose which ones I use on which basis and when I'm practicing. I don't get to play as much anymore because my focus is teaching for sure, number one, and then my family is a huge thing. We have a 6 months old, so trying to be dad and do that kind of thing. I'm also teaching elementary school part-time right now as a
Yikes.
long-term sub at the end of the school year, which has been an experience. But back to the gear, it's a lot of Zildjian cymbals for sure. I love new beat hi-hats. They're my favorite to play with. A customs and A's for crashes, lots of different, the brighter and the darker sounds kind of all over the place a little bit with that. And again, it kind of goes back to the style of music that I'm playing. There's sometimes I really like a kind of a trashy, really dark ride cymbal sound, and there's other times where I just want that really bright ride cymbal sound. If I'm playing like a Latin group, I want it to be super bright and crisp and clear. And if it's more of a jazz or even kind of a funky thing, having it be a little bit darker of a sound from the cymbal standpoint. But definitely, I'm not necessarily tied to Zildjian. I use them mostly. I'm kind of tied to Mapex because I endorse their equipment, and I think the nice thing about Mapex to me is they've always given me really really quality drums, and they're accessible and affordable. So from an education standpoint, I try and promote that company because I want kids to have quality instruments and then also be able to afford them. And in some cases, the top instruments in the world aren't always the most affordable instruments. And
Yeah.
so I think that their drums, they sound really good. And again, with the right heads on them, you can make them sound awesome.
I was gonna just bring that up again. Like, if there happens to be anybody listening that's, playing drums or whatever, you don't think for a second that you have to go out and spend 2 grand on an all maple kit.
Hmm.
I think you hit it right on the head, no pun intended, with saying that, you have decent drum heads and you learn how to tune the thing and you can make the cheapest drum kit sound good just with that right away. Just a pretty
Yeah.
simple upgrade. So yeah, for sure. Yeah, for me it's mostly Zildjian K. I love my Sweet Ride. I have a just again a mix of dark and bright and trash. You have an A custom crash, K Master Sound hats, and then I have one of those. What's the hybrid? Is that is it K hybrid? I have a splash
Yeah, I
cymbal
think
that's
so.
a real trashy sound, and then I do have one Peisty cymbal left over, which oh my gosh, I absolutely love. I have a Peisty Masters 19-inch Dark Crash, and
Okay.
so I do the most of the drum kit playing I do nowadays is through musical theater. I'm involved with the theater company in New Prague, that their summer deal, and
Hmm.
I've been involved with that since high school. So anyway, what I'm getting at is this cymbal is like a multi-purpose. If you need those swells and stuff like that, it
Hmm.
takes mallets really well, and you can also play nice ride patterns and stuff on it. So
Cool.
yeah, versatile for sure. All right, last thing I want to talk to you about here. Give me your three top recorded drum fills or parts.
Oh, jeez.
Probably pretty difficult to come up with, but let's see what you got.
Um, off the top of my head, uh, Scenes from a Memory, the Dream Theater album. I know that's not a drum fill or a part specifically, but I just think that, you know, I'm a huge I love it when I can sit down and I can listen to a full album. And so I
Hmm.
think that's how I'm going to answer that. It's not going to be specific fills or specific parts, but it's going to be albums. And sorry that I can't answer the question the way that you asked it,
All
but
good.
that's the way that I'm thinking about it. So, that album uh is just phenomenal. And again, from a compositional standpoint, the way that Mike Portnoy approached that album is it's like an orchestration. It's orchestral, and there's so much more percussion to it than it just being drums. So that's number one. Um, I really love Kid A by Radiohead, and that's a total different direction from a style of music standpoint than anything I've talked about at this point. But again, as an album or as a fill, specific in how it was written, that entire album I could sit and I could listen to on loop, just because there's so many good tracks in there that are influential to me as a percussionist and as a musician. Um, and then, oh gosh, is it In the Air Tonight? The Phil Collins fill, is that
Oh
the
yeah, the huge
that's
yes,
there you go.
iconic.
I give you one specific fill. It's funny because we go to base. We're in baseball season now, and in Mankato, there's a baseball team called the Moondogs, and one of their like introduction songs is that In the Air Tonight by Phil Collins. And like every time I'm sitting there, I hear that fill, I'm just like, yes, let's go, because it just gets me jacked up for a baseball game, which I don't, I kind of have that association with it. But it's an iconic fill. It's one that everybody knows, and like, you air drum it, and it's like that's the thing. So that's a fill for you. That's a specific one.
Awesome. I remember one time I was at school and there were some people in the band room and they're like, "Hey, can you play that part?" I'm like, "No, I don't have like 4 rack toms and I can't do it justice, so I'm not even gonna play it." I'll botch it. Cool. Well, I'll give you a couple fill parts, I guess. So I'm not like a big Coldplay fan, but one thing that I think is really cool is in the tune Fix You, there's that huge build and then the drum part kicks in, and that's like a really cool, to me anyways, a really cool example of like a very, very powerful drum part that's not overly complicated. And I just think that that's really cool. So that part, and then I gotta kind of go 90s a little bit here. So Spin Doctors, Two Princes, the introduction fill. He's playing like a 3/2 clave pattern on the bass drum, and then it's like 2 5 strokes, and he gets into this groove where it's all these ghost notes and stuff like that. So That's a super cool fill. And then, the last one I we talked about earlier is just Carter Bulford, and just the two and ants marching is just chock full of awesome grooves and fills.
Yeah.
And it's fun to watch live footage of him playing because he's just like so chill and usually like chewing bubble gum, and he's got the bandana on, and it's just like it looks like it's absolutely effortless. So he's so fun
And
to watch.
sometimes he has the gloves on.
Yeah,
It's like
yeah.
like that's just yeah, he also plays a lot of hertas, the 30-second note
Yep.
fills, and that's kind of a thing that he does, which I do a lot too because of that influence that he's got. So yeah, he's another, I mean, going all the way back to the beginning of the conversation, he's one that's like he's so influential, and his fills, especially the way that he moves around the kit, it's pretty phenomenal.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hey man, thanks so much. I think I covered everything I wanted to. Anything else you want to talk about while you've got a couple minutes or
No, I mean, not really. I just appreciate you having me and chatting through things. I think, I love how the music in this area is continuing to evolve and grow, and having conversations like this, whoever sees these videos, I know that you share them a lot, and I think that that's great. We can all learn from each other, and the connections that we have together, that's just going to make us all better. So I'm glad to do it. I'm glad to learn from you and hear your influences, because now I'm going to go back and listen to some of the drummers that you're talking about and some of the things that you mentioned too. So
I'll do the
yeah.
same. Hey, have a good rest of your school year, and thanks so much for the time, man. I really appreciate it. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you very much. Have a good night.
Yeah, you take care.
All right, bye-bye.